Welcome to the Cactus Clouds Art Studio. I am going to take you through my full process of pit firing these ceramic pieces in my backyard. What are Sonorox? First of all, these are my favorite little guys to make. They are a Sonoran desert version of the Koroks from The Legend of Zelda. I also have some other pots that went into this firing, and this clay has mica in it, which is why you see all of those sparkles. It was a more difficult clay to work with. It's from New Mexico clay, and it's their mica terracotta low fire earthenware. This is my first time working with low fire clay, and it was tricky. The elasticity is low, and so it cracks a lot as you're working. It requires a lot of compression, but it was very much a vibe, and I enjoyed working with it. Also, mica's natural glitter, it got everywhere. And a part of pit firing, of course, is experimenting with combustibles, which create different colors and effects. And I've only ever done this one other time, and I used some fresh plants in mine, and it created very cool patterns, I think, because the freshness and the moisture in the plants caused the smoke to avoid parts of the clay for longer. So when Eric's Flower Market, a local Tucson flower shop, reached out and asked if I ever wanted flowers for a art project, I told them about what I was working on, and I headed over there and picked up a bunch of flowers a month before my project. And then I went back again the same week of my project. So I had dried flowers and fresh flowers to work with as combustibles. My method for the pit firing is from my friend Shazieh. Her business and her Instagram is Agave Pantry, and she has been a potter for several decades, and I did a workshop with her, and she taught us her entire process, and that is what I'm showing you today. So this is just a 100% copper Brillo pad. You can unwrap it and then cut it into pieces, and I use this to tightly bind my combustible materials around my ceramic pieces. So the first thing that I did was prepared these little Brillo pads and took them apart and created these little sleeves with them. I wanted to use metal oxide powders, but I never got my hands on any, so I used these washes and I painted them onto my tin foil. I didn't know if they would still smoke up the same way, but we're trying it. So when it came time to pack up all the little guys and prepare for the firing, I had dried flowers, fresh flowers, some foraged plants from local areas, and some fruits and veggie pieces that we also saved. So it probably took me about 2 hours with my children's help wrapping up all of the ceramic pieces that we had made, thinking about if the moist flowers and plants that we used would hold the smoke back, how we wanted to artistically arrange them, packing them up so they would hold close to the clay, and then adding all of those dried bits and pieces. I had a theory about the dyes and colored paper that I wanted to try. We also included Himalayan salt, table salt. We tried adding some turmeric as well. And if you do some Googling, there's lots of different combustibles that people have tried and gotten different colors, but you really don't know. I also really wanted to include the creosote, which is classically goes with my little Sonorox because they are Sonoran desert babies, and so I've always included creosote in the presentation with them, and so we fired some creosote with them as well. And one note about using salt is that if the salt is in direct contact with your clay, it can cause it to disintegrate a bit because it has a reaction with the clay if it hasn't been bisque fired, which these have not been bisque fired. And there was one guy that had some salt clump onto his face, and there was some corrosion on the clay when that happened. So using the salt comes with a little bit of risk, but still fun. We also foraged some saguaro cactus fruits to wrap up the babies in as well, which we had to be careful with so we didn't get thorns in our hands. But this whole process of artistically wrapping them up in different things was so fun. And then after that, we packed them all up like those little hamburger dinners that you stick in the fire when you're camping, in the tin foil to hold all the combustibles together. Now for our pit, we used a garbage can and we drilled big holes. My husband deburred them because they came out pretty sharp. And then I headed out to my wood pile to collect some wood for the fire, and that's when I found that we have a carpenter bee nest in our wood pile, so I absolutely love them, and I gotta be careful collecting wood. This was an old frame that I made from sticks that my kids have collected up on Mount Lemon that was for my tomato vine for a while. And so I removed all the plastic and I broke up all of those pieces and then collected a bunch of kindling. I purchased this sawdust bedding from a local feed shop to fill the majority of the can. So I filled it just under halfway with sawdust, and I packed my heaviest pots at the bottom, and then I added another layer of sawdust and another layer of pots, and I layered this all the way up to the top. And then I got to build the bonfire on top, which is the fun part. I really love building fires, and I added these Palo Verde needles which were in my yard, and they burned really well. And then the most beautiful part Shazieh taught us in her process is to make offerings to the fire. And so I saved the prettiest dried roses and I added them to the top of the bonfire. And I just love that part of just making it beautiful and making an offering that isn't going to benefit you and just is part of the offering to the fire. In the workshop that I did with Shazieh, she also talked about adding intentions in your offerings to the fire, and you can write notes or put wishes on notes and make it a much more spiritual process than just the fun part like I did. I didn't know that pottery was for me until I learned about lighting pots on fire. Hi, fire brigade. I like how you're so supportive but ready. And as much as I love fire, we are also incredibly safe when we do fire, especially because we're in the desert in the summer. We got up and started this fire at 6 in the morning when it was still cool outside so that it could be completely covered by the hottest part of the day. And we really built up the fire. We fed it for about 2 hours before covering it, though you can also just feed it for 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, that needs to go down. There you go.
Woo. From this point, we basically just let it do its own thing. We continued to check on it every few hours to make sure that the fire was staying safe and contained. We covered it 15 minutes ago. There's still smoke coming from the holes down below. So now the coals just get to burn out and I'll open it tomorrow. Can you see the heat? It is tomorrow and the trash can is still super hot, so I'm gonna crack the lid just to help it air out a bit. That's all. Ooh, heat. Heat is coming out. I can feel it. This is the exterior of the can. So inside the can is still about 200. I don't know how much it's gonna get cooler because it's so dang hot out here already. I think it's already 100 degrees outside. Okay, I'm back out here ready to check the temperature. It's down to 150. So it's so hot that we're gonna carry this under the shade so it can actually cool. I usually open the kiln at 140, so I'm just gonna take the lid off now so it can get air. There we go. There's my little hamburger dinners. At this point, the can was still pretty hot, but I knew it wasn't that far off from when I could normally start opening my kiln. And I found myself way too curious to wait. The tin foil, at least from the one on the top of the pile, was cool to the touch. And so I carefully opened it up so I could see what was inside. While this little guy was still wrapped really tightly, some of them did burn out of their tin foil. This one was still, when we opened it up, still wrapped inside of the rose that we packed it in. This was the first one that I showed you earlier in this video. The little guy himself was still incredibly hot. I did not burn myself, but I definitely sat him down very fast and used the tongs for any further examination. And just as a point of interest, here's the rose still intact. That was his little sweater. After I unpacked the first little guy, I knew they were still really hot, so I let them rest for a while longer with the lid open because I didn't want any of their temperatures to shift so fast that it could cause them to crack. After we waited for a while, I invited my daughter out to help me dig all of these little guys out of the ash, and she definitely enjoyed it. As she was pulling these guys out of the fire, she kept saying, "The claw" from Toy Story, and we had some good LOLs. We did discover that some of the tin foils, the little guys burned right out of them, and so we knew we would have to dig through the ash. And I forgot to count how many little guys I actually made and put in the fire, so I still have to go outside and dig through the ashes now that they're completely cool and make sure nobody got left behind. Okay, so the ones at the very bottom were melting the plastic table. So I just flipped the lid over and I put them on here so that they can have some more time to cool off, but at least they're out of the bottom of the coals. And we are 29 hours from the time that we lit the fire to being able to unpack the babies. And this was the most fun part. My daughter helped me unpack all of them, and it was just, you know, just a fun moment getting the reveal. Here is a quick look of what some of them look like coming straight out of the fire. We brushed the ashes off lightly and were able to see some patterns and shapes and variation in color, but the real reveal comes when it is time to polish them. What is that green?
It's rainbow.
Why is there green?
Oh,
That's so cool.
to polish it.
So I just looked for a beeswax polish that came in a can like this. I set it outside for a few minutes to soften it up, and then I just used the Pottery sponges to polish all of the pieces. And this is interesting because you'll see an immediate darkening of color when you apply the wax, and then it will soak into the ceramic surface a little bit and the colors will lighten back up. So when I first started polishing these pieces, I thought that it was spreading the carbon and just turning everything black, and I was worried that I was destroying the patterns on the surface. But as they sat and soaked in the beeswax, the color lightened back up and you're able to see all of the patterns. So you can see here on this piece how stark the color differences were. And as soon as I polished it, it looked like it went away completely. And it freaked me out. And then as it sat, the colors came back out and the patterns came back out, and I was relieved. Okay, this was one of my favorite reveals. This was just a ball. I just had some extra clay and I was tired of sculpting little guys, and so I just made a ball. And my kids were making fun of me, "Why'd you make a ball?" And I was like, why not make a ball? But the surface of the ball was so smooth that it allowed for really interesting patterns and colors to appear. And so you can see that there's some really cool, there's some red, there's white, there's silver, there's that black and gray. And of course it's all shined up with the mica flakes, which are still intact. And I just really love my ball that I made. Okay, and this next reveal is an absolute delight. This little guy is going to haunt you in your dreams. What happened with his eyes? He is a monster. He is a sweet, sweet baby. I love him. I also made these leaves out of the white clay, which I thought would just make like a fun wind chime or a hanger or something like that. What I learned from making these is that the larger surfaces create more opportunity for interesting shapes and colors. And because these were just larger, mostly flat surfaces, I got some really cool patterns on them. Also, as I was waxing these ones, I was convinced that that carbon was spreading and destroying the pattern. But once again, the longer that they sat, the wax soaked in and the pattern was fully visible. Okay, and just a quick moment for this really cool leaf. Now these larger pots that I made, I used the same type of clay from New Mexico clay, but it was a red clay with mica, and these two I actually threw on the wheel. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this clay was difficult to sculpt with because of the low elasticity. It was very fun to throw with on the wheel. These two pots were the biggest pieces that I put in the pit fire, and as I mentioned before, I did not bisque these pieces in my kiln before this. I put them straight into the fire, which is what my ancestors would have done. And it was incredibly satisfying to know how soft and brittle these clay pieces felt when we packed them, that we had to be even careful that we didn't scratch them with our nails, to now being able to polish them fairly roughly with a strong hand, and to feel how solid and secure this earthenware clay has become. Here is a reveal in the sunlight. The next day after pulling these out of the fire, cleaning them and waxing them, and you can see how distinct all of the colors and patterns are. And so even though when I was waxing them it looked like the color was just turning all black and gray, it's still there and all the patterns are there, and you can see where there was branches or flowers or leaves pressed against the clay. Now I do think that if I did larger pieces, I would see much more pattern and color because there would just be more surface area for that variation to happen. But I am so pleased with how these little guys came out. You can see this one is tinted more brown than the others. There are others that are more black like this one, some that are more green, and this was just really, really fun. I love seeing the mica in the clay still shining. This was my first time trying this out, and so I had a lot of things to figure out and moving pieces and things that I was collecting, like the trash can and the sawdust and all of that. But what I want to do in my next round is number all of the pieces that I make and keep notes of what I wrapped each one of them up with, because I am so curious. And we did film quite a bit of packing up, so we might be able to figure out which ones were which and how they were decorated and prepared, what botanicals and what things went into the tinfoil with them. I did a lot of research before I began this project, and I had a whole list of combustibles that I was hoping to get my hands on. And when it came down to it, I worked with what I had and what was available to me, and I couldn't be more pleased with how this all came out. Nothing exploded, nothing cracked, and we all had a great time. Okay, bye!